What would you do if the woman who knelt before you in a white wedding dress, promising purity and devotion, was actually a ghost from your family's darkest secret? In the marble palaces of Dubai's ruling elite, where bloodlines matter more than love and honor demands absolute truth, Sheikh Faisal Al-Nayan was about to discover that some brides don't come to build futures. They come to burn them down. This isn't just a story about a wedding night gone wrong. This is the devastating tale of how a virgin bride became a widow's revenge, how family honor became a murder weapon, and how the most carefully arranged marriage in Dubai's history ended with blood on silk sheets and a dynasty torn apart. What the newspapers never reported was that the real crime wasn't the murder. It was what the Al-Nayan family did 3 years earlier that made it inevitable. The Al-Nayan palace sat on the outskirts of Dubai like a monument to old power in a city obsessed with the new. While glass towers dominated the skyline nearby, this compound remained deliberately traditional. Sandstone walls 20 feet high, date palms lining the private road, fountains that whispered instead of roared. The architecture spoke of continuity with the past, of tribal lineages that predated oil wealth, of families who had ruled desert territories when Dubai was still a collection of fishing villages. Sheikh Faisal Al-Nayan, at 35, embodied this intersection of tradition and modernity. He wore Seville row suits to business meetings and traditional kandura at family gatherings. He held an MBA from Oxford and consulted tribal elders on major decisions. His business empire, construction, real estate, government contracts, generated hundreds of millions annually, but he still observed the prayer times his grandfather had taught him as a child. The Al-Nayan family occupied a unique position in Dubai's complex hierarchy. They weren't ruling royalty like the Al Maktoums, but they were close advisors, landowners, holders of strategic government positions that shaped policy without holding obvious titles. Faisal's father, Sheikh Mohammed, sat on the boards of sovereign wealth funds. His mother, Sheikha Latifa, descended from a prominent Abu Dhabi merchant family. Their lineage mattered in ways that money alone could never purchase. But the palace that should have been filled with brothers and cousins felt emptier than it should. There was a ghost that haunted the Al-Nayan compound, though no one spoke his name anymore. Rashid, the younger brother by 3 years. The one who had defied family expectations in ways that couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. Rashid's portrait had been removed from the main majlis where family photographs documented 5 generations of Al-Nayan men. His room remained locked, its contents undisturbed but never visited. When relatives gathered for holidays, his absence created a void that everyone acknowledged through careful silence. He had been erased from family history with the thoroughness that only shame and necessity could motivate. Faisal stood in his private office, reviewing documents for the marriage contract that would be finalized in 3 days. The marriage had been arranged through intermediaries, following traditions so old they predated written record. His mother had selected the bride from appropriate families, narrowing candidates based on lineage, reputation, and most crucially, verified purity. The chosen bride was named Amara bint Abdullah, daughter of a respected family from Sharjah with distant connections to the Al-Nayan clan. She was 23 years old, university-educated but traditionally raised, described by the matchmaker as exceptionally beautiful and appropriately modest. The family provided documentation of her virginity from a private medical clinic, a practice that Western commentators condemned but remained standard in their circles. "She is perfect for you," his mother had declared during the formal selection meeting 6 weeks earlier. "Pure bloodline, proper upbringing, no scandals. She will give you strong sons and maintain family honor." Faisal had seen Amara only once, at the formal engagement ceremony where she sat surrounded by female relatives, her face mostly covered, her eyes downcast in practiced deference. What little he glimpsed showed delicate features, pale skin suggesting minimal sun exposure, and a composure that seemed natural rather than performed. She had spoken softly when required to voice her consent, her Arabic carrying the formal classical pronunciation that indicated quality education. The marriage served multiple purposes beyond romantic considerations. It strengthened political alliances with Sharjah families who controlled crucial government contracts. It demonstrated Faisal's commitment to traditional values at a time when younger Emiratis increasingly pursued Western-style courtships. Most importantly, it fulfilled his mother's desperate desire for grandchildren, legitimate heirs who would carry forward the Al-Nayan name in ways that erased the stain Rashid had left. But tradition had fissures that Faisal sometimes glimpsed in quiet moments. Late at night, when business obligations were handled and family expectations temporarily satisfied, he would think about Rashid. Not the sanitized version of events that the family repeated when forced to acknowledge his existence, but the complicated truth that lived in Faisal's memory. Rashid had been different from birth, more sensitive, more questioning, less interested in the power structures that consumed their father's attention. Where Faisal learned to navigate family politics with strategic precision, Rashid struggled with the performance required of Al-Nayan's sons. He excelled at art instead of business, preferred literature to law, and asked questions that made elders uncomfortable. The real trouble began during Rashid's final year at university in London. He had returned to Dubai with a wife, a woman he'd married in a civil ceremony without family permission, without tribal negotiation, without any consideration for the elaborate protocols that governed Al-Nayan marriages. Her name was Zara. She was Egyptian, from a middle-class Cairo family, educated and modern. She wore hijab by choice rather than compulsion, spoke Arabic and English with equal fluency, and met the Al-Nayan family with confidence that bordered on audacity. She was everything the family couldn't accept: foreign, independent, and worst of all, the product of Rashid's individual choice rather than family arrangement. "You've brought shame to this house," Sheikh Mohammed had declared during the confrontation in this very office, his voice shaking with rage Faisal had never witnessed before. "That woman is not your wife in any way that matters to this family." "She's my wife before God and British law," Rashid had replied, his voice steady despite knowing the consequences. "I love her, and I won't pretend otherwise to satisfy family politics." The standoff had lasted 3 months. Rashid and Zara lived in a modest apartment in Jumeirah, supported by his modest savings and her work as a translator. The family cut him off financially, socially, and eventually legally, moving to exclude him from inheritance documents, business structures, and family trusts. Sheikh Mohammed declared that he had only one son now, that Rashid had ceased to exist as far as the Al-Nayan family was concerned. Faisal had tried to mediate, to find compromise between his brother's heart and his family's honor. He visited the Jumeirah apartment secretly, met Zara, and found her intelligent, warm, genuinely devoted to Rashid. But when he suggested to his father that perhaps acceptance could come with conditions, if they underwent a proper Islamic marriage ceremony, if Zara converted to Emirati citizenship, if they agreed to raise children according to Al-Nayan traditions, Sheikh Mohammed's response had been absolute. "Compromise is surrender. The moment we accept his defiance, we signal that individual desire matters more than family unity. That path leads to chaos." Rashid made his choice. Now he lives with consequences. Those consequences ended on a Thursday evening 3 years ago, when Rashid's car went off the road during a drive back from Abu Dhabi. The single-vehicle accident was ruled driver error, speeding combined with poor visibility during a rare rainstorm. Rashid died instantly. Zara, who had been in the passenger seat, survived with critical injuries that required months of hospitalization. The family buried Rashid quietly, in the family plot but without the public funeral that would normally mark an Al-Nayan death. Zara attended on crutches, her face obscured by a black abaya, surrounded by her own family members who had flown in from Cairo. She stood apart from the Al-Nayans during the brief ceremony, and none of Sheikh Mohammed's family acknowledged her presence. After the burial, Zara vanished. The Jumeirah apartment was cleared out, her phone number disconnected. Inquiries from her family were met with vague responses. She'd returned to Egypt to recover. She wanted privacy. She was starting a new life away from Dubai's painful memories. But there were whispers, rumors that traveled through the networks of domestic workers and hospital staff who observed things that powerful families preferred to keep hidden. Whispers that Rashid's accident might not have been accidental, that his car had been serviced the day before by mechanics connected to the family, that Zara had seen something or knew something that made her dangerous to Al-Nayan reputation. Faisal had asked his father directly one time, during a late-night conversation in this office after Rashid's death. The accident. Was it truly an accident? Sheikh Mohammed's response had been delivered with the calm certainty of a man who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. Rashid made choices that put him on a dangerous path. What happened was inevitable one way or another. The only question was whether he would destroy himself or whether family would intervene to limit the damage to our name. It wasn't an admission. It wasn't a denial. It was something worse, an acknowledgement that the distinction didn't matter, that family honor operated by logic that superseded individual life. Faisal never asked again. He accepted his father's version of events because questioning would require acting on suspicions he wasn't prepared to confront. Instead, he doubled down on being the perfect son, the one who followed every tradition, met every expectation, never questioned the decisions made in family interests. And now, 3 years after burying his brother, Faisal prepared to marry a bride selected through the exact process Rashid had rejected. The symmetry felt deliberate, as if the marriage was designed to erase Rashid's defiance by demonstrating that tradition ultimately prevailed. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until Amara bint Abdullah would enter the Al-Nayan palace as its new daughter, bringing with her the promise of a future uncontaminated by past rebellion. If only Faisal had looked more carefully at the engagement photographs. If only he had questioned why a prestigious Sharjah family would be so eager to marry their daughter to a family marked by recent tragedy. If only he had wondered why Amara's eyes, in that brief glimpse he'd been allowed, had held something that looked less like modesty and more like calculation. But he didn't question any of it. And that oversight would cost him everything. The wedding ceremony unfolded with the elaborate precision that only significant wealth and traditional expectations could orchestrate. The Al-Nayan palace had been transformed into a venue that balanced cultural authenticity with unmistakable luxury. Marble floors were covered with Persian carpets worth millions. Crystal chandeliers illuminated rooms filled with roses imported from Ecuador. The guest list included government ministers, business magnates, and enough of Dubai's elite that security required coordination with actual police forces. The men's section of the celebration occupied the main majlis, where Faisal sat on a raised platform wearing traditional dress, white kandura of the finest Egyptian cotton, a bisht threaded with gold, and the family's ceremonial khanjar dagger at his waist. Around him, male relatives and guests performed the rituals that had marked Al-Nayan weddings for generations. Traditional songs, ceremonial coffee service, formal recitations from the Quran. Faisal maintained the composure expected of a groom from a family like his, but his mind wandered to the women's section where Amara was undergoing her own ceremonial transformation. He had not seen her since the engagement ceremony 6 weeks earlier. Their communication had been minimal and mediated, formal messages exchanged through family members, carefully worded texts that revealed nothing personal. Tonight would be the first time they were truly alone. In a few hours, after the public celebrations concluded, Amara would be brought to the palace's master suite that had been prepared for them. There, in privacy mandated by tradition and secured by family guards, they would consummate the marriage that had been finalized in legal documents signed before the ceremony even began. The wedding night protocols were explicit and uncomfortable to contemplate directly, even though everyone involved understood them perfectly. Amara's virginity would be confirmed through intercourse. The blood-stained sheet would be discreetly verified by trusted female relatives. This physical proof of purity would complete the marriage contract, confirming that the Al-Nayan family had received what they'd been promised, an unblemished bride suitable for producing legitimate heirs. Faisal found these traditions archaic even while preparing to participate in them. His Oxford education had exposed him to Western perspectives that critiqued such practices as barbaric violations of privacy and dignity. But he also understood their function in preserving tribal order, in ensuring clear paternity, in maintaining the social structures that had served desert societies for millennia. At 11 p.m., after hours of celebration, the formal transition occurred. Sheikha Latifa, Faisal's mother, appeared in the doorway of the men's majlis with 3 other senior female relatives. Her presence signaled that the bride was ready, that the public portion of the wedding had concluded, that consummation protocols could proceed. Faisal stood, accepting congratulations and knowing looks from male guests. His father embraced him formally, whispering words of advice about husbandly duties that Faisal barely heard through the anxiety suddenly constricting his chest. Then he followed his mother through the palace corridors toward the master suite that had been closed to everyone except decorators for the past week. "She is nervous but prepared," Sheikh Latifah said as they walked, her voice carrying satisfaction. "I have spoken to her myself. She understands her duties and welcomes them. You will find her appropriately innocent but not ignorant." The distinction was important in their culture. Brides should be virgins but not completely naive about marital relations. Strategic preparation that allowed tradition to be fulfilled without the awkwardness that complete ignorance might create. They reached the master suite's heavy wooden door, carved with geometric patterns that dated to the palace's construction a century earlier. Sheikh Latifah produced an ornate key, unlocked the door, then handed the key to Faisal with maternal satisfaction. "Be gentle," she advised, "but be firm. Establish from the beginning that you lead this marriage as an Al-Nayan man should." Then she departed, leaving Faisal alone in the corridor outside the room where his bride waited. He entered to find the master suite transformed into something that felt like a set design for an Arabian Nights fantasy. Candles provided soft lighting that flattered without illuminating completely. Rose petals scattered across surfaces released fragrance that bordered on overwhelming. The massive bed, imported from Italy, was draped in silk the color of fresh blood. A deliberate choice given what was expected to stain those sheets tonight. And there, standing beside the window overlooking the palace gardens, stood Amara. She wore a white nightgown of modest cut that somehow emphasized her figure more than revealing it. Her hair, freed from the elaborate wedding styling, fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her feet were bare, a detail that seemed simultaneously innocent and intimate. She turned as Faisal entered, and for the first time, he saw her face fully, without the veils and strategic lighting that had obscured it during previous encounters. She was breathtaking, delicate features that suggested both Arab and Persian ancestry. Large dark eyes that met his gaze with an intensity that contradicted the submissive demeanor he'd expected. Pale skin that seemed to glow in the candlelight. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. A virgin bride, nervous but willing, raised for this exact purpose. But there was something in her expression that Faisal couldn't quite categorize. Something that looked less like bridal anxiety and more like anticipation of a different sort. Her lips curved in a slight smile that seemed knowing rather than innocent. "My husband," she said softly, her voice carrying an accent he hadn't noticed during the brief engagement ceremony. Not quite Sharjah dialect. Something else underneath it. Something familiar in a way that raised instinctive alarm. "Amara." Faisal moved further into the room, suddenly unsure how to proceed. He'd been with women before, discreet relationships during his university years, brief affairs with foreign women who understood the limitations. But this felt different, weighted with family expectations and legal permanence. "Are you afraid?" she asked, and there was definitely amusement in her voice now. The great Sheikh Faisal Al-Nayan. Nervous about his wedding night? The informality startled him. Brides raised as she supposedly had been didn't speak this way to their husbands, especially not in the first moments of marriage. "I want you to be comfortable," Faisal said carefully. "This is a significant moment for both of us." Significant. Amara repeated the word as if testing its weight. "Yes, I suppose that's accurate, though perhaps not in the way you imagine." She moved toward him, her movements graceful but somehow predatory. The candlelight cast shadows across her face that transformed her features into something less innocent, more dangerous. "Do you recognize me, Faisal?" she asked when she was close enough that he could smell the jasmine perfume she wore. "Truly recognize me? Should I?" The question emerged more defensive than he intended. 3 years ago, you visited a modest apartment in Jumeirah. You met your brother Rashid and his unsuitable wife. You sat in their tiny living room and drank tea and pretended you cared about finding compromise when you already knew your family had decided on a different solution. The blood drained from Faisal's face. The familiar quality he'd noticed in her accent suddenly clicked into place. Egyptian undertones beneath careful Emirati pronunciation. The knowing look in her eyes wasn't bridal anticipation. It was recognition. "You were there?" Amara continued. her voice still soft but now carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. You don't remember me specifically because I was careful to stay in the background, to serve tea quietly, to be invisible the way foreign women are supposed to be in Emirati homes. But I remember you. I remember your face when Rashid explained why he loved his wife enough to sacrifice everything. I remember your expression. Sympathy mixed with judgment. Understanding tainted by the certainty that he'd chosen wrong. Who are you? Faisal whispered, though he already knew. Already understood the magnitude of the deception that had delivered him to this moment. I'm exactly who your mother's matchmaker said I was. Amara bint Abdullah from a respected Sharjah family. Her smile widened, revealing something cruel beneath the beauty. But I'm also Zara Mansour from Cairo, the unsuitable wife your brother married in London. The woman your family tried to erase after they murdered him. The revelation hit Faisal like a physical blow. He stepped backward, his mind racing through implications that cascaded with sickening speed. She was Rashid's widow, his brother's wife, standing before him on their wedding night, legally bound to him through a marriage contract built entirely on fraud. That's impossible, he managed. You're supposed to be. The records showed. How did I fake virginity tests? How did I create an entirely new identity? How did I infiltrate your family's elaborate marriage arrangements? Zara, because that's who she truly was, regardless of the legal documents that said otherwise, laughed bitterly. Money, Faisal. The same currency your family uses to solve all its problems. Except I used it to create problems instead. She moved to the dresser, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a folder that had been hidden beneath lingerie that would never be used for its intended purpose. She threw it on the bed, where it landed with a slap that sounded like accusation. Medical records falsified by a clinic in Sharjah that specializes in creating convenient documentation for families who need it. A new identity purchased through the same underground channels that provide fake passports and money laundering. Testimony from family members who were paid actors. Every piece of verification your family demanded, I provided. Because I knew exactly what you would look for. I knew exactly how to become the perfect bride for an Al-Nayan son. Faisal stood frozen, his brain struggling to process the layers of deception she'd orchestrated. The elaborate marriage arrangements that felt so secure had been completely compromised. Every verification, every background check, every traditional protocol that should have protected against exactly this scenario, all of it had been systematically defeated by a woman motivated by something more powerful than money. Revenge. Why? The question emerged hoarse with implications he was afraid to confront. If you hate my family so much, why tie yourself to us through marriage? Because now I'm not just the foreign woman your family erased. Zara's voice carried triumph that was terrifying in its intensity. I'm an Al-Nayan wife. Legally, religiously, socially, your family recognized this marriage in every way that matters. You signed contracts before witnesses. Your mother presented me to the family. Hundreds of guests watched you accept me as your bride. Those actions have consequences that you can't simply erase by murdering me like you murdered Rashid. My family didn't murder Rashid, Faisal said automatically, though the denial felt hollow even to his own ears. It was an accident. His car was sabotaged. Zara's composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath her careful performance. Mechanics connected to your family's businesses. Brake lines compromised in ways that wouldn't be immediately obvious but would fail catastrophically under highway conditions. I survived because I insisted on wearing my seatbelt despite Rashid saying, we didn't need them for a short drive. He died because your family decided his defiance was more dangerous than his death. You can't prove that. But Faisal heard the uncertainty in his own voice. He'd always suspected. He'd just chosen not to know. Can't I? Zara moved toward him again, and Faisal realized she was enjoying this. The revelation, the confrontation, the absolute control she now wielded. I spent 3 years gathering evidence. Medical records showing Rashid's perfect health before the accident. Testimony from witnesses who saw suspicious men near his car the day before. Financial trails connecting your family to the mechanics who serviced the vehicle. Documentation of your father's explicit threats about what would happen if Rashid didn't end his marriage. She was close enough now that Faisal could see tears gathering in her eyes. Not from fear, but from suppressed fury that had been building for 3 years. I could take all that evidence to the police, present it to the media, destroy your family's reputation with proof that you murdered someone for the crime of loving the wrong woman. But that wouldn't hurt enough. That would be too quick, too public, too abstract. So what do you want? Faisal asked, though part of him already understood. I want you to suffer the way Rashid suffered. Zara's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more menace than shouting ever could. I want your family to watch their carefully arranged plans collapse into scandal. I want your mother to understand that her perfect daughter-in-law is the ghost of the woman she tried to erase. And I want you, specifically you, to live with the knowledge that you welcomed your brother's widow into your bed while pretending his death was acceptable collateral damage for family honor. She reached into her dress, pulled out a small device, a smartphone set to record. This entire conversation has been documented. Video and audio. Proof of your family's complicity in Rashid's death, delivered in your own words and your guilty silence. I'll release it tomorrow, along with my true identity, along with all the evidence I've compiled. The Al-Nayan dynasty will be destroyed not by external enemies, but by the woman you invited into your palace and legally bound to your family. What happened next occurred in a charged silence where years of grief and rage and suppressed truth hung in the air between them. Zara moved back into the room, sat beside Faisal on the bed covered with sheets that were supposed to display proof of consummated marriage, and for long minutes, neither spoke. I have a condition, Zara finally said. If you're truly willing to let me destroy your family, there's something I need first. What? The truth. All of it. Everything you know about what really happened to Rashid. Not speculation or suspicion, actual knowledge. My evidence is solid, but it's circumstantial. If you confirm what your father did, if you provide insider testimony that proves intent, then the legal case becomes airtight. Faisal knew what she was asking. Not just admission of his family's crime, but active betrayal that would send his father to prison. Blood testimony against blood, the ultimate violation of tribal loyalty. Everything he'd been raised to never do. My father called me the night before the accident, Faisal began, his voice mechanical as he forced out words he'd never spoken aloud. He said the Rashid situation had become untenable, that allowing him to continue his marriage was setting a precedent that would undermine family authority for generations. He asked me if I understood that sometimes hard decisions had to be made for the greater good of the family. What did you say? I said I understood, because I did. I understood exactly what he meant, and I chose not to ask questions that would make me complicit in ways I couldn't ignore. The confession hung between them, not quite murder, but enabling through willful blindness. Zara's expression remained unreadable. After the funeral, Faisal continued, I found records in my father's office, payments to the mechanic shop, instructions to make it look accidental. Nothing explicit enough to prove intent in court, but clear enough that I knew with certainty what had happened. I photographed those documents before my father destroyed them. I've kept the photos for 3 years, telling myself it was insurance in case I ever needed leverage against him. Where are those photos now? Encrypted storage, multiple backups. I'm not quite as naive as you think. For the first time since her revelation, something that might have been respect crossed Zara's face. Send them to me. All the evidence you've compiled. Add it to mine. Together, it becomes a case that even your family's lawyers can't defend against. Faisal pulled out his phone, and in the surreal intimacy of a wedding night that had become a confessional, he began transferring files that would destroy everything his family had built. Each document that sent felt like cutting away pieces of his own identity, but also like removing infected tissue that had been poisoning him for years. When the transfer was complete, Zara stood, smoothing her nightgown with hands that finally trembled slightly. I need to leave. Stay here. Don't contact your family until tomorrow. Give me time to get somewhere safe before this explodes. Where will you go? Somewhere your family can't reach. I have contingencies. She moved toward the door again, then paused. For what it's worth, Faisal, I think Rashid would have forgiven you eventually. He believed people could change, could become better than their worst choices. I hope he was right. Then she was gone, slipping through the door and into the palace corridors where guards would assume she was simply a nervous bride seeking air. By the time anyone realized she'd left the compound entirely, she would be beyond reach. Faisal sat alone in the master suite, surrounded by candles and rose petals and silk sheets that would never serve their intended purpose. His phone began buzzing within minutes. His mother, concerned about the prolonged wedding night, wanting confirmation that consummation had occurred successfully. He let it ring unanswered. At dawn, when the automatic release timer expired on Zara's compiled evidence, the story exploded across every media platform simultaneously. Rashid Al-Nayan's death, long dismissed as a tragic accident, was exposed as premeditated murder orchestrated by his own family. Evidence documented with sickening precision, financial trails, mechanical reports, insider testimony from Faisal himself, and Zara's recorded confrontation in the master suite. The wedding that was supposed to restore Al-Nayan honor became the scandal that destroyed it. Society pages that had celebrated the union hours earlier now dissected every detail of the deception. Government officials who had attended as guests now scrambled to distance themselves from association. Business partners suspended contracts pending investigation. Sheikh Mohammed was arrested within 48 hours, charged with murder and conspiracy. He maintained stoic silence, neither confirming nor denying the accusations, his dignity intact even as everything else collapsed. Faisal testified against his father at trial, providing the insider perspective that transformed circumstantial evidence into conviction. The media called him either a hero or a traitor depending on their perspective. His mother never spoke to him again. The Al-Nayan business empire fractured. Pieces sold off to cover legal fees and satisfy creditors who no longer trusted the family name. Zara disappeared completely after the evidence release, her location unknown even to prosecutors who wanted her testimony. Some reports placed her in Cairo. Others suggested she'd moved to London or perhaps further, Canada, Australia, somewhere the Al-Nayan family's remaining influence couldn't reach. She had destroyed the dynasty that killed her husband, and then she'd vanished like a ghost finally laid to rest. 5 years after that wedding night, Faisal Al-Nayan lived in a modest apartment in Abu Dhabi, working as a consultant for small businesses that couldn't afford more expensive advisors. He'd been exiled from the family compound, disinherited, his name still cursed by what remained of the Al-Nayan clan. His wife, in legal terms, he was still married to Zara/Amara, their unconsummated wedding creating legal complications no one had ever bothered to resolve. Existed somewhere in the world, a woman he'd met for one night and enabled to destroy his entire world. Sometimes people recognized him on the street. Some offered quiet respect for the courage it took to testify against family. Others spat at his feet, calling him a traitor to blood and tradition. He accepted both responses with equal silence, understanding that he embodied contradictions too complex for easy judgment. Late at night, when the small apartment felt emptier than palaces ever had, Faisal would think about Rashid, would remember his brother's laugh, his impossible optimism, his stubborn belief that love mattered more than tradition. He'd think about the nephew or niece who never got to exist, about the future his family had murdered along with his brother. And sometimes, rarely but inevitably, he'd think about Zara, the ghost who had haunted his wedding night, who had turned his family's traditions into weapons against them, who had chosen revenge over safety and justice over survival. He hoped she'd found peace somewhere, though he suspected that kind of peace might be impossible for someone who had lost everything and reclaimed herself as vengeance. The Al-Nayan dynasty that had ruled for generations was gone, reduced to scattered descendants who no longer used the family name publicly. The palace stood empty, sold to foreign investors who planned to convert it into a luxury hotel. Sheikh Mohammed died in prison, maintaining his silence about guilt or innocence until the end. And somewhere in the world, a woman who had been both virgin bride and vengeful widow lived with the knowledge that she had destroyed an entire family to avenge one man's murder. Whether that destruction brought her peace or simply added more grief to what she already carried, no one would ever know. Some stories don't end with justice or redemption. They end with ashes where palaces stood, with scattered survivors trying to build meaning from ruins, with questions that have answers but no resolution. This was one of those stories, a tale of how tradition became murder, how deception became revelation, and how a wedding night ended not with consummation but with the death of everything several families had believed about honor, loyalty, and the price of valuing reputation over human life. What happens when the perfect bride becomes the perfect weapon, and wedding vows become revenge declarations? Sometimes the answer isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about how far people will go to protect or destroy family, and how the line between those two impulses becomes invisible when honor matters more than truth.